Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. Yeah, so we have a lot to get to this time. We are going to be launching against some fairly large contracts. We have geostationary satellites to get into orbit. We are attempting to return biological samples from orbit around Earth. And yeah, we're eventually going to get to finish up some navigation satellite contract as well. So we've got a pretty busy flight schedule, so let's get to it. 3, 2, 1. Liftoff of another Tele-1 rocket carrying the GeoWatcher A satellite up to orbit. I mean, hopefully up to orbit. It's fully possible that these engines tear themselves apart, but you know. Anyways, yeah, so we have another Tele-1 rocket that is heading its way up into orbit, and this is using the newer architecture of the essentially the Atlas D, I believe, is what this kind of represents at this point. So yeah, we have the NA-5 LR89s and the NA-5 LR105s, which gives us mostly better reliability. What? Why are you complaining at me, MacLeod? Oh no! Oh man. Well, so much for that, I guess. Kaboom! Well, that's a damn shame. Another one of these failed. Alright, well, let's, yeah, sure, disengage at this point, friend. Yeah, with this, we can safely say we are not going to space today. Oh boy. Welp, what do we have left? Hey, look at that. The avionics for the Able stage is rolling sadly off into the sunrise. Okay, for real this time, we have ignition and liftoff of a Tele-1, this time lofting the Returner 2 payload, which... I mean, before I get too excited, let's see if this thing tears itself apart. I think I have like a 75% failure rate so far with my Tele-1 rocket system. Like, it works perfectly in tests, but gosh, the reliability rating on having 3 boosters running at the same time feels, I mean, more than 3 times as bad. Because if any one of these engines fails, it tears the whole thing apart, and there's really nothing I can do about that. With the way that test flight works, we are down to just under 7% ignition failure rate on my side boosters and a little bit over 7% on my core boosters. Very much hoping that we are not going to have any more issues with this system. I would very much like to get a payload into orbit, please and thank you. But yeah, I guess we'll see how this goes. But yeah, we have a very unfortunately shaped, now that I'm actually looking at it, it looks like a Sharpie sticking on top of an Atlas rocket, which is very silly. But this is basically my new and improved Able upper stage on top of a Tele-1 rocket, and we are going to get into a very funky orbit. Alright, just under a minute left on this burn of the side boosters of my Tele-1 rocket system, which is finally performing decently well. Famous last words or something like that. But yeah, this is lofting into a very high and weird orbit. We are going into a 150-kilometer periapsis, perigee, and a 55,000-kilometer apogee. And so that, you'll know, is way above, what do you call it? That's way above geostationary, even. But most importantly, it's way above the space high environment, and the plan for this is to go get science around Badoom! Pop! I love it when they hit each other, but they don't explode. Anyways, yeah, this is headed up into the space high environment to do a whole bunch of science that I was not able to do before. We have on here biological sample and biological sample 2. So this is both the advanced one that we just recently got and we just recently did in low orbit, and it's also the original biological sample that I had already done before Kerbalism. And so the plan is we are going to get this up into a crazy high apogee and a very low perigee, and we're going to test two things. First, we're going to get the science, hopefully, and actually return it. But we're going to do that by lowering the perigee from 150 kilometers to, not that. I'm going to make a little node that kind of pushes the perigee down to a point that I hope is survivable. And we are going to test this heat shield and see just how well it works, because if it can if a capsule, if this science return capsule can survive a high orbit return like that one, 55,000 kilometers, then I think it should be pretty close to the moon. Like, I've heard a number that I haven't checked at all, is that the actual heat load is about 15% higher for a high orbit versus a lunar orbit return. And like I said, I haven't really checked that, but I just want to see kind of how this behaves coming down from a high orbit compared to from a 150 kilometer circular orbit around Earth. So yeah, we're going to see how that behaves in that environment. But step one, we need to finish getting into orbit. So I'll see you in about a minute and a half. All right, just 5 more seconds to go until we burn out this stage, which has lasted us this long. I am eternally grateful to you, sir. And it's off and away, and we have lit our AJ-10 101. Well, this will be the 142. Yeah, it's the more efficient of the upper stages, but still uses the AJ-10 early model. Yeah, and look at that. It's down to just above 3% ignition failure rate. So fingers crossed that my rocket systems are finally starting to get a little more reliable. As fun as it is to watch my Tela-1 rocket system lose one of its 2 side boosters and spin out of control, I'd rather not waste my time picking up the tiny pieces that are left in the cloud of debris that results from those failures. All right, and we have upper stage cut off. We have gotten into a perfect orbit, almost exactly 150 kilometers by 55,000 kilometers, which is just fabulous. So let's turn that off for now. Yeah, and we're gonna wait for a connection, but let's see, just stage this off. There we go, perfect. With just the gentlest of separation forces, the able stage is being removed, and we are left with what I am calling my biosatellite capsule. This is the Returner 2, but this is based on the biosatellite program that NASA launched that I think I mentioned before. It's featured in Buzz Aldrin's Space Program Manager, which is one of my favorite space management games because there's like 3 of them in existence. So it's not a long list, but it is an excellent game that I enjoy pretty thoroughly. So inside here we have the 2, can't really see very well, but yeah, we have, inside this fairing, we have a stack of the 2 biological sample capsules, and then we have a giant battery pack because this is not solar powered. I just wanted to have this battery powered for the time that it is going to be in orbit, and then it'll come back down and be done. But Buzz Aldrin's Space Program Manager featured the biosatellite program as one of the American missions that you could run to get a whole bunch of prestige in the early satellite period. And it was obviously a real-life mission that was the first unmanned satellite that belonged to the US that was used for biological research in space. So it was launched in 1966, so we are still a couple years early on that, which is lovely. It was launched by a Delta, which means that it should have been launched on my Thor, basically, but the Thor is not advanced enough to do what I'm the very particular thing I'm doing to it, I don't think the my Thor could have done. But yeah, it was intended to test a bunch of different biological experiments or biological specimens, such as frog eggs and plants and microorganisms, that sort of thing, compared to observations being made on similar things down on Earth, which is how a lot of these experiments are run in space. Is we have a control down on Earth that we know how it works, and then we try it out in microgravity and see what might be different from what we understand. All right, so before I go too much further into talking about the biosatellite, we need to figure out what we are going to do with this. So you'll notice that I've put this into a funky orbit where we are swinging through low space very quickly and then jetting out to a very high apogee. And that is the principle of the Molniya orbit also, is the idea is they want to spend most of its time out in a particular latitude, but I don't actually care about the latitude. I just care about the being in high orbit for as long as possible, which is why we went so far beyond just high orbit. It's going to take us 8 hours to get from our perigee up to our apogee, and that means that we're going to be spending several hours per orbit in high space, and that means we are going to be getting our high space science, high Earth space science. So the idea then is this is going to be dramatically cheaper from a delta V perspective to return home from, because we're going to be able to get up there with basically the same rocket. Like I could have circularized a very similar orbit to this with my Tela-1 rocket, but getting back home would have required a lot more than just a single separation motor. All right, as we see Earth recede below us, we have switched our communications out from the anemic basic ground stations, and we have gotten a good connection with one of the Deep Space Network satellites, which gives us lots and lots of data up and down, which is an incentive for us to start working on our geostationary ComSat network so that we don't have to stress about this in the future. So, because at that point we'll have the satellites always in connection with the Deep Space Network nodes, and then they'll be able to relay that signal all throughout low Earth orbit, which will be just fantastic. So that's something that I'd like to do in the near future. In the meantime, we have a biological sample that is running, and as you can see, that is going to take 24 hours. We still have 5 hours up to our apogee, so we're probably going to get this done in 4 or 5 orbits total. Well, actually less than that, because if it's 5 hours up, it's also going to be 5 hours back down-ish. So yeah, we'll probably get this done in maybe 3 orbits, which is fabulous. That is going to give us plenty of time in our batteries, which will last for about a week actually running these experiments. Oh, have I already finished Space High on the biological capsule? Wow, okay. I probably could have designed this differently if I'd known that. I thought I checked that. Goodness. Oh well. The important return that we're looking for here is getting the 50 science back from biological sample 2. So that is kind of the point that we are trying to get to. All right, so we scream through low orbit and then way back up, and there we go. See, we got almost half of our science on that first pass, which is just excellent. All right, so we are it's gonna take one more pass around the Earth to get to finish up the biological science to see exactly how it is that these specimens react under microgravity. And we're up in our high orbit once again, and there we go. We got that science. Fabulous. And also more moon science being transmitted as we speak. Okay, so let's make a plan for how we're going to get this darn thing back home. So I can't just, push retrograde up at this point. That would be bad because that would push us pretty deep in to the atmosphere and also into the surface with our perigee, which would probably we would probably burn up before we slowed down enough. So let's not do that. I want to bring our perigee down to about like 60 kilometers. So what I'm thinking is that we can just grab a node here. And I have 133 meters per second. There we go. That gets us 55 seconds. Let's grab the maneuver node editor. There we go. 60 kilometers. So yeah, if I make a plan for that, like when I have connection and then like execute next node, I should be able to do it. I should have plenty of battery to make that happen without issue. Because my little secret is I've got some batteries in here also. But we do want to come down a bit because the big battery is inside here. All right, so we are coming down. I am just tracing down this path with the Deep Space Network. I am orbiting nearly at the same time, so you can kind of almost see how a geostationary orbit would work. You saw that for a little while, I was orbiting around the Earth at about the same speed that I was, that the Earth was rotating underneath me, which, you know, demonstrates exactly what a geostationary orbit is. But we'll get to that launch later. Hopefully that Tele won't tear itself to tiny, tiny pieces. Okay, so we are about an hour and a half out, and we still have good signal, so I think it's about time to say farewell to this, our biological samples. We have a couple things that we need to do before we actually jettison that. First of all, we need to transfer the data inside the capsule, so that does move that up. And don't worry, I did account for that weight transfer this time. You saw that subtle camera shift, and that almost screwed up my last returner mission, but this time I actually accounted for it. The next thing I want to do is to transfer the battery power. So this bank still has most of its power, and so I'm just going to transfer those into the smaller batteries up here, just in case. I really don't think that's going to be a problem. I think there's going to be like multiple days of leftover. I was worried that this was going to take like a week of real time to cycle in this orbit before it was going to spend enough time in the high orbit environment. But I think I went a little bit higher. I made this a higher apogee, and I think that's going to shortcut that whole process. All right, so I have transferred the data up into the return capsule, and I have charged up the batteries as much as I possibly can. So we should be able to, at this point, jettison that back bit and let that go, and then find out that we are 7 kilograms overweight. Huh. I'm not sure what I did. I'm not 100% sure what happened here. I thought I had planned this out so that this would be 147 kilograms, so a little bit underweight, even with the weight of the samples, which are, you can see it's 10 kilograms and then 200 grams, I think, is how much the regular biological sample weighs. So I'm not 100% sure where that extra weight came from, but I'm pretty darn annoyed by it because this means that I can't reorient this craft until such time as I lose 7 kilograms, which I can't do unless I throw away the data. So that's pretty darn annoying. Let's see. I don't know. I guess let's just see what our trajectory looks like coming around here. Oh, I'm still rotating. It was very slow, but I am in fact rotating still. This might save me. If I end up rotating in a direction that is close to my node, I think I'm just going to have to go for it. Okay, so what I've done is I'm just seeing what it would look like if I burn close to this, like basically trying to simulate what this is going to look like if I actually pulled the trigger on this burn. And it would bring us down to a perigee of about 37.5 kilometers, which is going to be real spicy, but I don't see that we have a whole lot of other options. I could just kind of like slowly tweak this, but let's see how this works. So I am going to kill rotation because I would love for this to stop rotating as soon as I get avionics control in 7 kilograms. I'm not sure how much this the PSPC fuel weighs, but I'm hoping that over the course of this burn, I'm going to get control and be able to maintain my position. So let's make sure that I'm ready to do that. RCS is enabled. Kill rotation is on. Yeah, that's about as good as we're gonna get. So 3, 2, 1. Ooh, we're rotating a little bit. All right, well, how did we do? We have a periapsis that looks real good, actually. Just kill rotation right now, please. There we go. Yeah, so we actually have a 50-kilometer apoapsis, apogee, which is almost perfect. I love it. Whew, man, that was a little more dangerous than I wanted it to be. We've got 2 days of electric charge, plenty of nitrogen RCS, so yeah, this should be good. So now nothing left but to get down into low orbit and mention that, yeah, the biosatellite, they had a lot of like really basic biological specimens on there, but Biosatellite 3 was launched in 1969, and it actually had a little male pig-tailed monkey on board named Bonnie, who was intended to be in orbit for 30 days, but unfortunately, he deteriorated after 8.5 or so and had to be brought down, and he later perished. But that taught us a lot about how to better prepare for like how to put serious rigor into our preparations for sending life into space. So it was a worthy sacrifice. He did a lot to further the American space program. All right, so we are coming down. This is still going to be a fairly spicy re-entry. We are up over 10,000 meters per second, which are velocities that you just don't see in stock whatsoever. As we are coming down and we still have good signal, I am going to push us to surface velocity minus on the smartass. And I am going to stage off. And I'm going to stage off the separation motor, leaving just the capsule. So yeah, this is all there is to it. Now it's just time to see how well this works on re-entry. All right, so MechJeb is holding our attitude as we enter the upper part of the atmosphere. Like I said, this is going to get pretty darn low, so this is not an optimal return trajectory, I have to imagine, but I'm going to admit that I haven't really tested this. I don't always go through every single stage of every single mission before I record it. I like to do some of it live so that I can be as surprised as you are by what weirdness happens. But yeah, I'm hopeful that this is going to survive because that will get us a tremendous amount of science, and also it will save the monkey. Oh, and I suppose I should also say that we do actually indeed have a contract on the line. I did pick up another orbital speed and return safely to Earth contract, which is on the line for this succeeding. So here is hoping on that. Here, let's watch. Oh my gosh, look at that ablator burn off. Oh no, there's no way. This is going to melt. And the surface of the ablator heat shield is just melting away in the fires of re-entry. I'm actually wondering if a little bit of a steeper trajectory would have been good, because then it would have slowed down a little bit faster. But yeah, we are dipping under 9,000, and we are almost out of ablator. Oh, is it just gonna pop? Oh! The answer is yes. Yes, it will. Okay, so that return trajectory does not work, I have confirmed. That doesn't necessarily mean that this heat shield will never work for that fast of a re-entry. It just means that it's not going to work on a 50-kilometer perigee. So probably something either a bit higher or a bit lower, which I find a little strange because... yeah, it burned out before it it really hit the thickest part of the atmosphere and really started to slow down a lot. So there's a that is a thing that you can do, is if you go really deep into the atmosphere, it's possible for it to slow down fast enough for it to work. But yeah, that is not going to work for this. We are probably going to have to put up a more capable service module that is able to slow us down from orbital velocity, which seems fair. But I was kind of hoping I was going to be able to cheese it with just using that that system. But oh well, we've learned a lot, and we'll get them next time. Okay, so the failure of our previous version of the Returner 2 capsule puts us in a bit of a bind. We are really actually a little too close for comfort on the reach orbital speed and return safely contract. I have 89 days left. If that fails, we have plenty of contract slots, so I should be able to pick up new contracts to make up the massive shortfall that will create. But it's going to put us in a pretty bad position, and if at all possible, I'd like to not have to pay that $225,000. So what I've done is I've reconfigured the return capsule and the parameters of the mission. I've added some extra delta V to help slow us down, and I'll talk more about that when we get up there. But I've also spent 3 rush builds, which cost me like 60-ish thousand. Like the first one was like 10 or 15, something like that. But the last one was like 20,000 funds. So it was actually hugely expensive and is going to very much eat into our profit margins. And has also caused me to need to pick up a weather satellite contract as well. So I'm kind of digging myself further and further into a hole by needing a backlog of contracts, which I then have rockets fail or mission parameters fail, and then I have to rerun them over and over again, and that causes me that cascading problem that we are just now looking at now. But hopefully this will all work out, so that should not be an issue. But so we have 89 days left on the contract, and you'll see that I have gotten this moved up so that we have 75 days until that rolls out. And then that's another key period of time, because it's going to take about 8 days for that craft to roll out to the launch pad. So that's 83 days, which means we then need to finish the contract inside of 3 days, which I'm pretty sure we can do. In past experiences, we're able to get the number of orbits we need to get the science within like 2 days. So yeah, pretty tight deadline. And if this Returner 2, if this Tele 1 fails in any way on the way to orbit, or if I've misjudged something on the way back, then we are going to fail this contract, and that is going to be expensive. So fingers crossed that won't happen. All right, here we go. Tele 1 sitting out on the pad. Let's see, what do we have here? About a 6% chance of mission failure there, 4.5% chance on each one of these. So, okay. No use dithering on that anymore. So 3, 2, 1, engage that autopilot and ignite the engines. And we have liftoff. Fantastic. We have a good liftoff on our Tele 1 rocket, carrying up the Returner 2 payload into orbit. Hopefully into orbit. So yeah, a couple changes on our mission parameters that I will show you real quick, which is that I've tuned the apogee down to 40 kilometers. And I'll talk a little bit about what the different capabilities of the heat shields are once I get into orbit, and that's kind of all that we have to worry about. The key takeaway that I can tell you right now is when they say low Earth orbit heat shield, they mean low Earth orbit. Like, not medium Earth orbit, not like with your apogee up at geostationary, because that's high Earth orbit, which is basically a lunar return almost, like the velocity involved. So yeah, when it says that it's rated for low Earth orbit, please keep in mind that is judged at generally below 2 million meters or so. I'll show you what my trajectory ends up being when I plan this out, but it's oh no! Oh, shoot. Well, that's really unfortunate, but I'm not sure there was anything we could have done to recover that. We had a 15% thrust loss on one of my side boosters, which threw us into an unrecoverable trajectory. So now I guess we get to see how to recover a career in peril. Because as frustrating as that was, and we have indeed failed this contract just as promised, just in a few days after that. It's still, we can still get back from this. Like, we still have plenty of room and contract slots to dig ourselves out of this hole. So let's start working on picking up new contracts. So yeah, I'm going to grab this contract again with the hopes of getting it done within the next year, and mostly because I have the design. I just need the engines to not fail on me on the way up. So that gets us 150,000 back towards the black. And the reason why that's so important, even though I already have enough contracts out to, like, if I did the geostationary satellite, I would be back in the black with all of these other contracts that I have, but it's not going to matter because I'm not going to be able to roll anything out, and there's also maintenance costs. So I need to pick up extra contracts and put myself further and further into the hole. And when you can't actually finish contracts fast enough, that's when you're kind of at the bottom of that hole of, like, you keep accepting contracts to get money and then you fail other contracts because you just aren't able to deliver. Gonna knock out another X-Plane mission, which is, it'll get me just 33,000 on the advance, which is nice, and then it'll get me a little extra money afterwards, but I'm gonna need to have money to earn that money. So we are going to need to still, what else? Well, that's an easy one. Let's do another lunar orbiter. We already have one around the moon, so we'll just put up another one of the same type, and I know that we can do that, and that gives us 2 years, which is good. Okay, so that gets us back into the ability to launch and fly rockets. But yeah, we now need to be very careful about when these darn things need to launch, because we need to get another one of those returners built and ready to go. I'm going to need to fly this navigation satellite mission here pretty quick. Probably just get that one out of the way next. Okay, so step one, we're going to throw another returner on the pad, or not on the pad, into the build queue, which is good. And then here's our Moonfarer 1, so let me just make sure that this is using the latest and greatest. Yeah, it's not actually using... What the heck? I updated my RP-1 and it looks like it... I had this stuff unlocked, I thought. But it looks like it's taken that away. Like, no, you were not allowed to have that. Yeah, it's taken away everything. All of my tech purchases, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to have to cheat myself back some money to get those again, because I'm like 100% certain that I've unlocked these. Do it on the AJ too? No, the AJ's fine. Okay, so that is 86,500 funds that I was set back for no particular reason, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and buy those, and then I'm going to give myself back that money because I know that I bought these configurations before. So there must have been some update that invalidated that. So I am looking for 86,000. Okay. So there we go. Now we're back to about where we should be. But I'm actually going to just throw this out, and we're going to use the latest and greatest of my new telerockets rather than what I had built before, because there's no reason to use what I built before. Alright, so for this we're going to use what I'm calling the Able 3-B, which is somewhere in between the actual historical Able 3 and the Able 4. Like these designations are based on the actual realistic Atlas Able 3 and Atlas Able 4 configurations that I found some readouts of online, and like the actual engines match up pretty well. Like the Able 3 used the NA-3 engines, the LR-89 and 105, and it used the AJ-10 101A. It used an Altair, but like I said, that's been kind of a little thing that's been bugging me for a long time. And then the actual Atlas Able 4 used the NA-5 variants of its two booster engines, and then it used the AJ-10 104, which for us is the AJ-10 mid that has restart capabilities, which is very cool, but not actually necessary for what I'm doing here. So I'm going to go to my 3-B, which is the middle configuration where it's using the NA-5 boosters, but it's using the 142 AJ-10, which is the best one I have of the AJ-10 earlies. So, you got all that? There will be a test. The important thing to keep in mind is just that this has a Altair, the latest and greatest AJ-10, and my latest and greatest NA-LR-105 and LR-89 engines. Pop that on there. Okay, and I don't think I actually need the Altair engine, so we're going to pop this off for a second and see. Yeah, that gives us almost exactly the right delta V, which is perfect. And there we go. So that's going to give us, hopefully, a more reliable ride into orbit, because this is at 5-ish%, and this is 3.2, so that's not... It's pretty similar, but a little bit lower failure chance than the one that I just had explode on me. And the 142 is, yeah, also lower. So yeah, hopefully this will not have any issues. I guess we'll see. But we have like 2 years, so we have cushion. Okay, so there we go. Got the staging all set up. Got us renamed to Moonfarer 2, and we will throw that in the launch queue. Okay, so there we go. That's our loadout in the hopes to finally get us back on track. And with the extra money that we have, I think the right move is to spend a bunch of that on VAB upgrades. In the hopes that, you know, we don't end up... we end up being able to build a little bit faster and nail these contracts. So that shaves 10 days off of each of these Tela rockets, which at the cost of 140,000 funds is dramatically cheaper than rush building a bunch of them, or them individually. All right, so the Navstar F is ready to roll, and I believe I can actually use the smaller Complex 60 pad instead of my big hefty 150-ton pad, because this is just using a Thor Able. So a couple nice things. That cost me less, and it also takes a full day less time, which is very nice. So we'll do that. All right, here on the pad with the Navstar F, which I'm hoping very much is going to be an uneventful launch. So 3, 2, 1, ignite the engines. And we have liftoff. Very good. So this is a Navstar F. This is one of our early navigation satellites, and that is going to be bringing this payload into a 900-kilometer-ish circular orbit at about 66 degrees inclination, which is very handily doable by our Thor Able stack. And this is upgraded with, I couldn't tell you the serial number or whatever, but this is the latest and greatest LR-79 and the latest and greatest AJ-10 early, which has a fairly low failure rate, so fingers crossed that that all works the way that we hope it will. And Miko on our LR-79, and we have staged off that booster and are now gliding up to our target apogee. We'll manually stage off the fairings at this point. And coming up on our second stage ignition, and there we go. Looks like we are looking good. Yeah, so the data at launch is relatively low for both this one and the LR-79 because these are the latest configurations that I unlocked with 1960 orbital rocketry. So I've only flown this one once, I think, after the inheriting of 2,000 data units from the previous version. But yeah, so that makes them fairly reliable, and now that they are getting a little more mature, a couple versions in, it's getting to the point where they're not exploding all the time. So this rocket gave me just as much trouble at the beginning as the Tela rocket is giving me now, and so hopefully in the future, after another iteration and a couple more flights, the Tela will be as reliable as this is. And so the only other interesting thing to say about the NavSat satellites, this being the this should be the fourth one that I have launched. Well, that's not quite right. This should be the fourth contract that I'm completing, and with that finish, that's going to let us upgrade to the next tier of contract, so to speak, and hopefully those new contracts will be a little bit more lucrative and interesting as far as getting that payload up and what is going to be required to do so. now that I think about it, it's not necessarily a good thing that every single thing is going to end up being launched by my Atlas imitator. Yeah, I'd like to continue, hopefully, whatever the next thing is still going to be able to be launched on a 60-ton launch pad, because I like having smaller launchers that are able to launch smaller payloads and have that niche available to me, as opposed to just launching everything with one giant Omni booster. And we should be just about in orbit. It finishes us off with RCS, and there we go. Fabulous. So now we just wait for 2 minutes and for the stability of our orbit. All right, contract complete. Just a little 12,000, but we are getting more Doppler curves to refine our navigation algorithms, and that is indeed what this is about. Is it about testing the algorithms to make sure that things work the way that we think that they do? And so we'll just stage that off and leave that in orbit. And there's the probe itself. And this should be marked as debris at this point, theoretically. RF probe. Maybe it's not. Okay, so we'll mark that as debris. Generally, I have that, and I know on all of my Atlas variants, I have that set so that they automatically set as debris when they are staged off, but I'm just not sure that I did that with this. So anyways, that is that. All right, so indeed, we have cleared the early navigation satellite contracts with the paltry 24,000 advance and 12,000 on payout, and that leaves us with now the operational navigation system. Wowzer. So this is actually a full-on constellation of navigation satellites. So this is not just put one up into an arbitrary network. This is put up a full network, just like our ComSat networks. Looks like that requires about polar orbits. This shouldn't be too hard to do. With 120 units of navsat payload, they want us to get into a 1 million meter circular orbit inclined to 88 degrees, which I think should be our Thor Able should be capable of that. Maybe. I'll have to go test that to make sure, but I think that should work, and that will be a fabulous thing, and that'll give us a pretty decent payout. Not that great, but pretty good, but not something I want to rope myself into just yet. And it also unlocks the second generation navigation satellites. So these are pretty much a one-to-one it's the next tier of the early navigation satellite contract, where we can do this 3 times. It's basically a test payload, not part of any kind of network or anything. But while the operational navigation system is kind of like an early navsat sort of thing, where it's testing out one of the earliest configurations that we had, we have to do the second generation navigation satellite system with actual ComSat payload as opposed to navsat payload. So that's the heavier, denser, well, not heavier, but denser payload mass. And then these will unlock the ability to put up either the GPS network or the Soviet GLONASS network. It says here that the payout is definitely worth it, but the penalty for failure may bankrupt your space program, which is definitely something that I need. But for either one of these, I'm going to need to do 3 second-gen navsat contracts, so we will get to that when our list isn't so cluttered. And I really like these, just as kind of an aside, just talking about these more in general, I love these satellite contract progression systems where this requires you to get slightly better and slightly more capable rockets that are able to put up more and more payload into weird orbits. And that's both realistic as far as the kind of things that we were testing back in those days, the capabilities that we were kind of pushing against, and also it puts functional things into orbit. The navigation satellite system was obviously a real thing, and it doesn't really have in-game implications in the same way that the, for example, ComSat network is going to have. But it uses similar design philosophies, right? And it gets you thinking about how to do these things. And it gives you real life examples to kind of launch yourself off of. And so I love that. And I love the little mini progression things where you have to put up a couple of these little satellites for the money that you get on those contracts. And then you do slightly harder ones for a little bit more money. And then you unlock the big boss battle, I guess, if you could call it that in Kerbal Space Program. That gives you a big amount of money and a big boost in what you're trying to do. Instead of just grinding part contracts and it's the same thing over and over again, it gives you that sense of pushing towards something that I find really, really cool and I really enjoy in RP-1. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to getting more into later on, but we have finished the first step of early navigation satellites, and I think this is the first one that we are going to push towards the end of, I think. I'm kind of doing some of these in parallel, but at a certain point, like when you need to launch 8 more Thor rockets between these two contracts, so at a certain point you need to kind of just focus. Okay, so Navstar F is in orbit, so we can scrap this one, because I've just been leaving duplicates just in case things fail, because they so often do. Okay, so just kind of looking down the list of things that we need to do. Oh, I need to get an X-plane up and ready to go. Johnny Flores once again jumping out of space dangerously. Let's see, next is the geostationary satellite. I have a year left on that, 2 years on the lunar orbit. A little less than a year on that one as well. All right, so next we'll do the geostationary satellite, and then I'll probably do the weather satellite, and then the lunar orbiter. Or no, not the lunar orbiter. So we'll do a geostationary satellite, weather satellite, orbital return, moon orbit. So we got a busy launch schedule coming up is what I'm saying. And we'll also put another couple of points in the VAB because obviously that is what we need to focus on. All right, so we just unlocked crew survivability, which just gets us some new life support options that is going to make it possible to put people into into orbit. So that's something that is basically just one of the last prerequisites for our manned capsules. So we are in the run up to that for sure. We are back up to 22 science, and I think we are just about tapped out on our moon probe's ability to provide us science. So let's see. Ooh, we could actually jump up to interplanetary communications, which, I think I might do. Yeah, I think that's actually a great idea. Because you'll notice in my Kerbal Alarm Clock window here, I have actually been using the transfer window planner to try to just kind of figure out when my transfer windows to other planets are, because some of the next contracts that we have available to us are interplanetary flybys, and they provide a ton of money. And also, they will provide a tremendous amount of science once we are actually able to get out there, because that will have us returning high solar orbit science and also high orbit science for each of the planetary bodies that we are visiting. And both Mars and Venus are, I think, doable with the boosters that we have available to us right now, which is just super cool. It's not so much more Delta V that you need to launch a tiny probe out to Mars than it is to launch it at the moon. And you might even visit the moon on the way out, depending on how you build your trajectories. But anyways, so that's something that I think is within reach, but we will need to have better communications to be able to do so. If we don't have the communications upgraded, then we are not going to be able to maintain contact and get science back from our vessels. And one of the important things that you unlock with interplanetary communications is not only the regular upgrades, you also start getting dish antennas, which we are going to need to use to communicate at those monstrous distances, because that allows us, I believe, to use not only the VHF and UHF frequencies that we've been using so far, but it will allow us to jump into the S band, I think. The S-band is the kind of frequency that is often used with dish antennas, as I mentioned, and it was used in most spacecraft from the 60s until the late 70s. So it's something that is going to get us really good high-frequency communication that the wiki for real antennas tells me is going to get us up to at maximum technology level, which we will not be having right now, will get us 330 kilobytes per second, or kilobits per second, pardon me. But it should get us decent bit rates from way the heck out. And that's going to get us into the interesting point of needing to aim antennas, which is going to be interesting, but I think should be just fine. So it's something that we're probably going to want to have our communications network up in orbit before we really start thinking about that. But this is just one more step on the way. And if I can start putting relay satellites in orbit, like ideally I want a geostationary relay satellites hovering above each of the Deep Space Network ground stations. That should get us some really good communication throughout the entire sphere of influence of Earth. And I don't know, I mean, I've never set up an RSS communications network at that range, so I'm not 100% sure if you actually need to have like big dishes above the ground stations to actually communicate, or if you're just going to be communicating directly down to the Deep Space Network. But one way or the other, getting that communication network up and running is also part of this. But we are definitely going to want to get these upgrades before we start thinking about flinging probes at Mars and Venus. All right, Future Justin here, wrapping up this episode basically where we started it, with a geostationary satellite that I am attempting to get into orbit, with the hopes that the rocket doesn't actually fail this time. But we are all out of time. I end up chattering a whole bunch about what geostationary means and how you get into that orbit with the technology that we have available to us right now, so I will have to save that for next time. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and let me know what you thought down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.